We're going to be looking at a matter of authority. We're going to be looking at the authority of Christ and why that matters, because it matters. It is. We are not allowed to worship however we like. We're not allowed to have any kind of religion or worship whatever we like. There is an authority, and the authority rests in Christ. And this evening we're going to start with Luke chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. But we start with something, it's a question asked by the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. And it's a valid question. What they ask now, honestly, they're going to show themselves not being honest. Okay, that what they're asking is for him to answer a question. But he says, okay, when you answer my question, then I'll answer your question. And they pretty much understand if they answer his question, they have answered their own question. They don't like where that leads. But they are asking a very good question. The question is a valid one. And this is coming from the chief priests, scribes, and the elders. Now it happened on one of those days, as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted him. So, he is teaching publicly. And notice what it says. He's teaching the gospel. Of course, the gospel means good news. What's the good news? The good news is salvation of mankind. That's the gospel. All right, and so they want to know, by what authority do you do this? Now that's a valid question. Or I'm sorry, we haven't actually got to the question yet. And spoke to him, saying, tell us, by what authority are you doing these things, or who is he who gave you this authority? Tell us, where'd your authority come from? All right, you're saying some things. They may be good. They may sound good. But by what authority do you have to say them? Because that does matter. And in this question, as we've said, is a good one. It's valid. And one he's willing to answer, but he's actually going to let them answer it if they will. But they're not going to. They're not going to answer it because, as we said, they don't like that answer. But by what authority? Meaning that if it's just by the authority of man, it's meaningless. If it's not from heaven, it's meaningless. But if it's from God, well, then the implication would be, the demand would be, all right, this is Scripture. This is to be followed and to be respected, to be seen as absolute over every single one of us. All right, so, but he answered and said to them, I also will ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? All right, now, we may have discussed a little bit of this morning. The fact is that many of the people believed that John was a prophet. Or they didn't stone John. And I don't know that they ever threatened to stone John. Now, John is killed by Herod, and it was because of a little bit of a promise that he gave, that he should have just neglected, just threw that vow out, or threw that promise out altogether. All right, that he's got to commit murder because he promised to do anything, and yeah, that sort of is not lawful, so we're not going to do that, but he does. He kills John. Now, many considered John to be a prophet. All right, well, that one they considered to be a prophet spoke of Jesus of Nazareth and identified him as being the Messiah. There is the Christ. That is him. All right, so, baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And they reasoned among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say, why did you not believe him? All right, and also it goes to the next step, because in believing him, you'd have to believe that Jesus is the Christ. Because there were many who were disciples of John who they weren't following John anymore. They began to follow Jesus, which is precisely what was supposed to happen. Peter, Andrew, both of them were in that category. They had been following John. Now, John has identified this man from Nazareth as being the Christ, as being the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world, that they begin to follow him. So there is this logical step that if we say it's from heaven, he's going to say, why didn't you believe him? Now, what they don't say next would be that logical step, that Jesus has to be the Christ. All right, so they're not going to say it's from heaven. But they know that whatever John did, this baptism of John, that it's got to be authorized. Is it authorized by men, or did this authorization come from heaven? There is that sense of authority. But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. So there's a bit of a fear here. Not a bit. They're afraid of the people, that they can't say it's from heaven. They're in a dilemma that they put themselves in. They can't say that the authority was from heaven, because Jesus will say, why didn't you follow him? And why don't you go in the direction that he pointed? If we say it was from men, that John was not a prophet at all, then people may stone us. So they would prefer, rather than to admit anything, to answer this question, they've got to just claim, we don't know. They got to claim ignorance. So they answer that they did not know where it was from. They're not going to say. I think they could have figured it out, but they're not going to say, because they're more interested in pleasing men. They're more interested in politics than they are in doing right, in following God. All right, so Jesus said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Now, they would have answered their own question if they had just answered his question honestly. They would have answered it. And I think they very well realized that they would have answered the question. But he doesn't answer their question, but they could have. And it's a simple question. What authority did John have? Because if John is pointing to Jesus as the Christ, then whatever authority John had, Jesus would have that same authority. He would have to be the Christ. And if Jesus is not the Christ, then John can't be a prophet. All right, now let's talk about the concept of authority in religion. We all understand authority when it comes to many, many things. We understand the authority of a homeowner. We understand the authority that the local police have, or going beyond that, the authority of a state government or of a federal government. We understand those things. We understand that there are authorities set in this world. And of course, in Romans chapter 13, it teaches of these things. And these things are to be respected, that there is such a thing as authority. But when it comes to religion, suddenly people just toss that out. Like there is no need for authority. I'll just do whatever I want to do. Well, how is that legitimate? How is that going to be good at all? How indeed? All right, so we're just going to talk about paganism for a moment, because I think when we talk about paganism, we can talk about numerous things that are in the world, of numerous world religions that fall under the same lack of authority and the lack of the concept of authority. But here, paganism means the worship of various gods and goddesses. You had, the Canaanites were pagan. They had their Baals, their Ashtoreths, Molech, and all these other things. All right. The Greeks were pagan. They had their Zeus and all his siblings, Poseidon, and all of that. And then all of these were to be worshipped somehow. So that is paganism. Paganism was all across the globe, everywhere. Everywhere. but it had no concept of authority. We could talk about Baal or Zeus or Ra or Odin or Jupiter. We can do any one of those and more and find that it's basically a do as you please. That you fill in the blanks. How is this going to be worshiped? Well, it depends on where you were as to how someone like, let's just say, Baal was worshiped and what Baal actually did. And of course, we can see in the Old Testament where every village had its own Baal and its own version of Baal and how Baal was to be served there. All right? But it's the same way when we're talking about all these others, that the idea of Odin in the Nordic regions was entirely very, very different than the version that was in places like Germany. It was very different. And it's definitely a worship as you like. Nothing is certain. Nothing's been set. There's nothing that you can go to and say, because of the authority of this particular God, this is how He is to be worshiped. And we have that down in writing from the ancient times. And this book proves that this is from that God. There's only one book in the world that does that. And it is the Bible. That's the only book that does it. Every now and then we talk about the Vedas with Hinduism. The Vedas they should be called, I'm not going to make fun, but they're vague. They're vague. They're poems. Extremely vague. And you think that you're going to learn how to serve these various gods and goddesses and all these other things by the thousands, by the score, that you can find out how to serve them and how they wish to be served. No, it's in a wide variety of ways. It's in a wide variety. All right, I've just got 2 examples up here. All right, if you can make this out, this is in Wyoming. This is known as Medicine Wheel, and it's old. All right, it's very old. Matter of fact, it is so old, nobody really knows who did it. All right. Now, there will be those who claim they know who did it, but they have no proof. There's no proof whatsoever that you can know who did this. This is on top of a mountain. You got to go a distance to get up. It's this flat area on a mountain, and if you can make it out, it's just stones that you can easily pick up. And you've got a circle, kind of a circle in the middle. Looks almost like a fire pit, but I don't think a fire was in there. And then you have these stones that come out radiating from that, a larger circle around all that, and then these other circles at the edges. And really the most complicated thing in all of this are these posts and the cables that have been put up here to keep you out of there. All right, that's the most complicated thing. Actually, a group of kids could have done this in an afternoon. Honestly, it wouldn't have taken much. Nevertheless, there are those that go here to worship whatever it is they're going to worship. All right, by whose authority? You don't know what this was. You don't know if it was a group of kids that did that just for the fun of it. You don't know if it was a thing of navigation. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. Could it be a thing of worship? Sure, it could be. But the likelihood is that it was put there to serve the God that these groups say they are worshiping is extremely unlikely. By whose authority? By the whoever they think they're serving, by the authority of that God has told them to come to here and would have nothing to do with this? I mean, it's completely baseless, and yet they do. And I have to say, they leave the place in a mess. They try to preserve this site, but they need to just stop that because they filth it up, is what they do. In whatever they think they are worshiping. All right, so we go from this one to this one. You may recognize this one right off. This is Stonehenge. This is in England. Once again, they don't know who put this up. Now, it has been common belief that the Druids put it there. All right? And I found out that the man who first said that just said it because he didn't know who else could have done it. And he's living in the 1700s, I believe it was. So he could not have known, he could not have seen who did it. But they don't know who did this. Now, recent archaeology and dating of things, they have discovered that this was put here at least 1,000 years before there were any Druids in England, or anywhere for that matter. All right, 1,000 years before. So the Druids could not have put it there. Nevertheless, you have Druids coming to this place to do whatever Druids do. They come here, and by the way, just as a side note, the Romans wanted to stop Druidism because of human sacrifices. They couldn't stand that. Even though the Romans had been guilty of that in their history, they had stopped it. And when the Romans came into Britain, they wanted to stop the Druids from human sacrifice and make it illegal to be a Druid. That's just a note of even certain pagan practices can be offensive to other pagans. And but in this, it doesn't stop people from coming here to worship how they think they ought to worship in a place they don't even know what it was for. All right, let's just make a little illustration. Just suppose that, and I will take, so the first thing that came to my mind, I don't know why, it's just, I don't play pickleball, it just came into my mind. All right? Pickleball evidently is kind of a fad at the moment. Let's just say a pickleball court, however it is, a pickleball court is preserved for a couple of thousand years. And it is discovered by archaeologists, and there are people of the day that think that is a place of worship, and they go there to worship their God. Well, we would know that it was never developed for that. It was just for a game. That's all it was. It was just for a game. Now, I'm not saying that Stonehenge or even that of Medicine Wheel was for a game. This especially. This took a serious amount of effort to put this up, even though it's not as skilled as other things that the ancients did. It's not near as skilled. But by what authority do you have to worship anything here? And the answer is, there is none. You don't know who did it, you don't know why they did it, and it didn't have anything to do with Druids anyway. Nothing. Nothing at all. But all authority has been given to Christ. What we do when we serve God is it must be under the authority of Christ, what He has authorized. Because He does authorize some things. He says it quite a bit, as a matter of fact. Matthew 28 and verse 18, and Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He has everything. He has everything. If He has all of it, that means nobody else has anything. That the rest of us have nothing. We don't have authority to establish a religion. We don't have authority to establish a church. We don't have authority to make up doctrine. We don't have authority to alter His doctrine. We don't have any of that authority. That authority has been set, it's been given to Him, and He does not hand that out. It remains His. He has that authority, and He does not give that to anyone else. I don't have a slide for this, but let's go to Matthew chapter 16. And we see these words. We just go to verse 17. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. What was revealed? What Simon Peter answered and said, verse 16, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, flesh and blood didn't reveal that. My Father's in heaven revealed that. He's the one, because you saw the miracles. Where'd that come from? It had to come from the Father. You saw the signs. You saw prophecy. You see prophecies being fulfilled. It shows He's, and aside from the fact you have John who has stated it, all these things have been done, and it's coming through the Father. And notice verse 18, and I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. All right, so what's he saying? He's saying, yeah, you are Peter, and on this rock, that's actually a different word than the word Peter. Peter in the Greek means a small stone, but this rock, Petros, or rather Petrae, this rock is a huge thing. It would be mountainous, as a matter of fact. And you could put anything on that rock and it's going to stay. As long as the mountain stays, it stays. But what is that rock? That rock happens to be what my Father revealed. It's that truth that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it, meaning He's going to die. He's going to die on the cross, but He doesn't stay that way. He resurrects. He comes back to life. He's here for another 40 days and then ascends into heaven. And there He reigns. There He is at the right hand of God. Verse 19, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now I want you to see, I'm reading from the New King James, but the New King James does not render these verbs as they should be. And it does give me a little note in the center column telling me how it could be rendered, and I think how it should be rendered. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. But those are not the right verbs. He says, whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven. It's past tense. It's already been accomplished. What you bind on earth, you're not the one binding it. That's coming from heaven. Heaven has determined that it's going to be bound. And whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. So with every part of doctrine, whether it's something that is being bound on us or something that has been loosed, that was bound in the past but now has been loosed, it's done by Christ. Christ has done that. No man gets to do it, whether you're Peter or any of the other apostles. They don't get to set doctrine. No one does. And even Paul, in his writings, such as in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he does have a section of not the Lord, but I say, and it's his opinion. All right, and you understand, well, that's his opinion, but he's making a distinction. And his opinion is just something that is for that particular time in Corinth. It doesn't apply to anybody else. And it was just his opinion for how they may be going through something in Corinth. And exactly what that was, we can't know. But it was a current situation, and he gives his opinion on it. And that's that. That's it. As a matter of fact, before Christ left, He told them that He was leaving. And He told them that He had not taught them everything yet because they couldn't bear everything yet. But He would send, once He left, He would send the Comforter, which is identified as the Holy Spirit. He does identify Him as that. Would come and guide them into all truth. Well, if they're guided into all truth, how much do they get to add to that? Well, nothing. Nothing. They add nothing to it. All right, so He has all authority, and what's the good in that? All right, just ask the question, who should be given the authority? Who should be given the authority as to how mankind is going to be judged, as to how if there's going to be any religion, who gets to have the authority? Who's going to be worshiped? Who gets that authority to decide that? Who gets that? Is it some ruler? That could turn dangerous. You give it to any man, and it's going to turn dangerous. You give it to anybody, and others are going to want it, and others are going to take it, even if it's by force, they're going to take it. And you can't trust anybody else anyway. Who should have that authority? One, the Son of God. He is our Creator. Number two, He's going to get everything perfect. He's the one that died for us. He's the one that has, from eternity, the plan for us. Redemption for us, long before. Now, I do mean long before we're even created. I'm talking about Adam and Eve. All right? Who should be given that authority if not the Son of God? Who is better qualified than the Son of God? Well, no one is. And of course, there's a common thing of, and it's so absurd, it's these community standards, that we should be judged by community standards. It's by community standards. Could you define that for me? What a community actually is and what those standards happen to be. Because you get that community together and you're going to find they're not agreeing with you. What you think the standards are, you think they're going to agree with all of that? No, they are not. And the idea of community standards would be so confusing. You're going to be judged according to community standards? That changes from year to year, day to day. And if you're traveling, what are you under now? Community standards. Another community. What are their standards? How am I supposed to live now that I'm in among them? It becomes absurd. It becomes confusing. Completely confusing. Who has the jurisdiction? Well, it couldn't be more simple. Christ has the jurisdiction. It couldn't be more simple at all. Christ has the jurisdiction. Who is judge over all? It could not be more simple. Christ. What is the standard? Simplicity again. It's the text of the Bible. We don't have to figure out what the current standards happen to be. That's kind of shady and constantly, that's a moving target. You never get it right. And you couldn't be certain about anything. But this you can be certain about. When Christ says that, let's just say, murder is wrong, and then identifies that murder is the taking of innocent human life, which does, the Bible is very clear about that. All right, we can have a certainty that human life, innocent human life, is in fact protected. All right, we can stand on that truth. We can stand on that fact because it's been authorized by God. Now, there are things in the past that were authorized by God that were bound under the law of Moses, but they've now been loosed, such as that of animal sacrifices. That's been loosed. We now have one sacrifice that was done for us back in the first century. That was Christ on the cross. All right, now that's been loosed. But are we under law? We made mention of it this morning, and the fact is that you have people that want to say we're not under any law. And they want to pretend that there's not even a mention of a law in the New Testament. Well, they're lying. They're either ignorant or they're lying to you. Because it's definitely there. Just in the book of James, you have the perfect law of liberty, the royal law, the whole law, and the law of liberty. All these, 1 verse 25, 2 in verse 8, 2 in verse 10, 2 in verse 12. But it's not limited. And then you have there is one lawgiver is able to save and to destroy, 4:12. Well, if you have a lawgiver, you have a law. Otherwise, it's not a lawgiver. All right? But it expands off of the book of James. It's more than that. We have Matthew 7:24, where Jesus says, therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I would liken to a wise man who built his house on the rock. He's doing it by way of illustration or by parable, if you like. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them, I will liken him to a foolish builder, this fool who built his house on the sand. Well, that sounds to me like we are advised heavily to follow the words of Christ. It sounds to me like that would be something like a lawgiver giving laws in the Sermon on the Mount, of which he is. That's exactly what he's doing. And he speaks of numerous things, everything from marriage to that of how to pray, to that of how to give, and also that of dealing with those who have a problem with you. There's numerous things that are there in a pronouncement of blessing on the various sorts of characteristics, such as being meek, being one who is a peacemaker, one who hungers and thirsts for righteousness. Now, we come to this, John 4:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. Commandments, that sounds like law to me. That sounds like this is not an option. Because he now turns around, he who does not love me does not keep my words. All right? For someone who says they love Christ and yet they don't keep his words, what are they? Well, they would in fact they would disregard the words of Christ. And according to him, they don't love him at all. Matthew chapter 7, and we see it beginning in verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. That sounds like law is to be done. It's not enough to call him Lord. It's not enough to believe that he is Lord. It is, because I can believe in the police department. I can believe in the police department and just break every law that I can think of. All right? I can believe in Christ exists in that, yeah, he is Lord, and then just break every one of his laws that I can think of. As many as I can in a single day. Well, what good is that? Well, would that mean that we love him? No. Would that mean that we truly do see him as Lord? Of course not. No, it wouldn't mean that at all. Galatians 2:6, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. He's been given a law. The law has been given to us through him. He has the authority to give us this law, and he will judge everybody by his authority, the authority that has been given to him. And it is an authority that spans through all time, starting from where he was given that authority in the first century up to this day, going all the way to the day of judgment. This is his authority over everyone. We look at our lives. Are we ready to take that step in front of the judge and have our lives being weighed and every action being weighed? If not, let's do what needs to be done. There's an authority that's been given to us. No one can take that from him. And anybody doing something else is just doing what they want, and it's not from Christ. But he has given us something very clear, very certain. Matter of fact, it can't be more clear than what has been given. We ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you please come as we stand and sing.